All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast. Where hope you got your flu shots early this year, because as far as the Lakers are concerned, it is full on basketball sicko mode with JJ Redick and company. So, choo, all aboard the JJ Redick sick train, whatever that means. I am your host, Jonathan Hernandez, and I'm joined by my co host, Tommy Alexander. And speaking of basketball sickos, Tommy has been a basketball podcast sicko literally the last week. So, Tommy, how are you feeling? And has JJ Redick's early play calling been the antidote you needed to get you through your recent virus?
Yeah, I have been a sicko in the wrong way the last week or so, recovering from some sort of cold or flu or something like that. But I will say, watching the team the first couple of games of the preseason has been a very pleasant surprise. I think, like, we'll get into the details, but high level, you and I have talked about this a bunch offline, but I don't. It was almost like for the last 3 years or so, I'd say the games were fairly unwatchable in the preseason for the most part. Like wonky lineups, heavy minutes to guys who weren't going to play, no organization that trickled into the season, and
Yep.
and all of that. I mean, it's like two games. I swear this is the most organized this team has looked since Frank Vogel. And, other than that first Frank Vogel year, the most organized they've looked probably in the last decade in the
Yeah, no,
preseason.
exactly. Yeah. And they seem serious. They seem focused. Yeah. Overall, the Lakers look good. And to your point, they look organized and they look offensively potent, but at the same time, defensively, they look pretty scrappy and bought in as well. And we'll get into it. So, Tommy, I guess let's just jump straight into our initial preseason first impressions after two games. I don't feel like we need to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Let me add all the caveats here. It's just two preseason games. The Lakers lost both games. We're not sure what's going to happen when JJ Redick actually has legitimate losses in his tally, et cetera, et cetera. But having said that, in the moments that we've seen featuring legitimate lineups and even illegitimate lineups, because there are going to be times when LeBron James isn't playing or Anthony Davis isn't playing or both, I guess what stood out to you the most, and why is it the play calling, the off ball motion, and the read and react principles that this team seems to have integrated and implemented so early already?
So just like the overall organization has been really impressive to see. I mean, we played our first preseason game after 3 days of practice. Media day was on a Monday. We practiced Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Who even knows how hard they went on Thursday with a game on Friday? And we came into this game, and yeah, it's game one of the preseason, so guys are rusty, guys are getting their legs under them, and we missed a lot of jump shots because of that, I think, but it looked like this team knew what they were doing. And even, last year, returning the same core 8 guys or whatever from the prior season, it never really looked like that in the preseason. All of the stuff, we've been big on this podcast talking about, like, put your money where your mouth is, and, like, the words don't really mean anything. We have to see, what actually, the words can be nice, but we need to see the result on the court. Everything that they've talked about in the offseason, we've seen in some form or fashion in the first couple games.
Mm-hmm.
And every time it's, they haven't done, or, they haven't fully achieved one of the goals that they, identified in the offseason. It's been an immediate identification of that and response on how can we address it. I'll just use one example on this point. JJ talked a lot this summer about corner crashing on offensive rebounds. We have not been a good team offensive rebounding the last couple of years. And in the first half of the first game, our corner crash rate was something like 48%. That was about the same as what it was last year. We came out in the second half of that first game, and the rate jumped to like 78%. And so it just shows you that, like, it's game one of, like, the preseason with a team led by two kind of older veterans, and they're still like in the locker room making adjustments like that. And it just felt like in the most critical playoff games of last season, or the past couple of seasons, those types of adjustments were not being made at halftime. So, all this kind of stuff has really stood out to me. And yeah, I'm just excited to see, especially looking forward to the next couple games with more practice, like what this team looks like.
Yeah, and so I specifically, your points are well taken, especially the team's ability to adjust on the fly. And I think JJ Redick's no nonsense, like he doesn't put up with non-execution. If he sees something, he's going to call it out and make sure the players know, which is nice to see even within a game, to your point about the improved corner crashing from one half to the next. Now, specifically talking about the offense, okay, so I'm going to take this back to when we first hired Darvin Ham and how excited we were about, the Budenholzer motion offense, read and react principles. Like you, me, and Alan would pass along links of how the Atlanta Hawks would play, right? And we'd be like, oh my gosh, look, everybody's moving. It's like beautiful basketball, Eastern Conference version. We're going to get this. And we got it here and there, and then we forgot it for large portions of the season. We kind of got it at the end of last season when Rui Hachimura entered the starting lineup, and we saw the 5-out principles, come together and get guys getting more acclimated with one another. But this year, to actually see it from day one in preseason, like these guys have been together, and I know some of these guys have been together for the last 3 years, but the fact that you're integrating a new coach in JJ Redick, and literally in the first 10 possessions of every game, I feel like maybe 8 out of those 10 possessions involved some sort of organized play call. You know what I mean? And within those play calling sets, there is an openness to still improvise and lean on the players' skill sets and strengths. And it's like all these things that we've been pining about, even from when Darvin Ham was hired, it's so jarring to see it on day one, And when you see the off-ball motion that's happening, where one motion flows into the next on one play based on what the defense is showing, the Lakers now have 3 to 4 different options they can go to because they are continually running this read and react motion on both sides of the court. And it's been a nice balance and mix of organized set calls and then flexible read and react plays that have a tiered structure to them, where it's like the play call could be for a specific set, but depending on what the defense is showing, if the defense snuffs that out, we can move on to level 2, level 3, because on the other side of the court, D'Angelo Russell is flaring off of a down screen from the baseline and ready to get the wide open 3, And so that is continually happening throughout the game. Whereas last year, I felt like maybe within a game you saw, I don't know, maybe 10 to 12 ATOs or sets, if that. But we're seeing 10 to 12 in the first quarter, it feels like. I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but that's how jarring it feels to see this much action, this much off-ball movement, this much screening happening on both ends of the court. Like, no two players are standing stagnant on the perimeter ball watching anymore. And there is just as much action happening off the ball than on the ball these days, if not more. So your thoughts on just like, man, it's as beautiful basketball as we've gotten since LeBron James and Anthony Davis have been here. And I want to point out too that the best play and set that JJ Redick still has is just giving the ball to Anthony Davis and LeBron James. But apart from that, to have this foundation set for the rest of the team is amazing.
Well, even on that LeBron and Anthony Davis point, it again, one game that we've seen them in this JJ system, but it feels like the offense is less get LeBron and AD the ball and more get the LeBron and AD the ball in positions where they are going to have an advantage and, be able to exploit their greatness. That is like a huge, huge key. And it's not just getting them the ball. It's getting them the ball and letting them be efficient superstars. And I think, that's something that JJ is going to bring. I think another factor on the fluidity of the offense is how that's going to trickle into our defense. last year we were in the half court, even with this starting five where we're starting D'Lo, Austin, and Rui, who I'm going to not single out as being bad defenders, but are not known as being amazing defenders. We in the half court we're still solid defensively with that group. We just got killed as a whole, not just with this five, but with the whole team. Top to bottom, we got killed in transition.
Yeah.
And part of the issue with transition, right, is how the game flows from one end of the court to the other. And when your offense is constantly stagnating and kind of putting you in positions where you have to take weird forced shots or shots where guys are like in weird spacing and you don't get back in the right way because you have four people on one side of the court, and it
Mm-hmm.
just felt like we were in those situations a lot. And it feels like, taking shots in the flow of an offense, having, guys strategically crash, because crashing doesn't necessarily mean I'm going for the offensive rebound. It could also mean I'm going to contest for the offensive rebound, but having a couple bodies down there also slows down the fast break because it limits that initial pass out after the rebound to some degree, right? I think all of these things are, offensively that we're doing are also going to help us significantly on the defensive side. And that's just like a practical example. I think there's also like, a maybe more subjective. You've seen players just more, at least in my opinion, you've seen guys who were not known to be like defensive guys in the past, a little bit more engaged on defense, I think, so far. And it's
Mm-hmm.
very early, but, I think they're engaged because what they're doing on offense makes sense to them. So it's
Yeah.
not like confusion, shot goes up, you're a half step off of recovering because you weren't expecting that shot to go up, because everything is just sort of haphazard randomness, as it's been the last couple of years. And so, like, I think that trickles into the other side where it's like, guys don't know, when am I going to get a look? I'm like put in an awkward position. We were constantly, like, beyond being terrible getting back in transition, we were also really bad matching up, and we constantly had mismatches coming back on the other side when we were playing defense. And so it just feels like a lot of that stuff, 2 games into the preseason, I feels like pretty cleaned up. And I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe folks listening to this are going to think we're way overreacting to 2 preseason games, but all I can say is, like, if you sat through and suffered like us through 164 games of the Darvingham era, you know what we're talking about, right? I'm not talking about the box score. I'm not talking about the stats and the advanced metrics and all. I'm talking about how it looked just sitting there watching the games, and it hasn't felt this smooth in quite some time.
Yeah, I think to your point, and you brought up a really good point about how offense trickles to defense and how both are interrelated. It's like haphazardness begets haphazardness, and organization begets organization. And that goes for, to your point about, if they are organized on offense and they know where they're getting their shots, and even players who lack confidence offensively from last season, like JHS or Max Christie, because they're getting these play calls, because they're getting these sets called for them, all of a sudden they have a boost in their confidence, and then they can just, it's kind of like they're running through progressions on both ends of the court. And because they have that confidence offensively, on the other end, they can run through progressions of like the defensive schemes that JJ Redick has implemented as well. And beyond the schemes and stuff, like, there is an intangible collective buy-in based off of the effort and competitiveness that we've seen from the players from JJ Redick early on, that is kind of undeniable. You know what I mean? Like, guys are diving on the floor. And again, 2 preseason games, honeymoon phase. We'll see what happens game 40 when we're on the road in Detroit. Like, are they going to be hustling this hard? But
Right.
this is all you can ask for early on. You know what I mean? This is like a good starting ground and first impression stage. This is the best first impression stage that you could ask for with JJ Redick, a first time head coach, because these guys, they seem all in on JJ Redick, and they have been effusive in their quotes and praise about his utmost preparedness. And even apart from the quotes, you watch the way they've been rotating on defense and hustling, crashing the boards, diving on the floor. And I don't know, you can't help but attribute a lot of this to the guys just really buying into everything JJ Redick is selling them. And so far, again, it's early. It seems like these dudes are ready to run through a wall for this guy, which is great. So yeah, from on a macro sense, like I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty optimistic. There's a lot of promise here. We shall see what happens when the actual games start and what happens when this team and JJ Redick specifically faces adversity. But when you are laying the groundwork the way that JJ Redick has, it it's hard not to be optimistic, you know? So why don't we take it to break? When we return, let's get into some specific players that have stood out to us thus far in preseason. So we will catch you guys after the turn. All right, so we are back. Tommy, who has impressed you the most this preseason? And I guess it doesn't even need to be impressed, but anything that you've observed out of any sort of players in particular that have piqued your interest, whether it's like, oh, that's something that he needed to work on that he's actually showing progress in, or, oh, that's exactly what we need from this player, et cetera, et cetera. I'll start by saying that Anthony Davis and LeBron James have looked very amped AF to get this season going. And it seems like a very nice and easy carryover from their Olympics bout. And obviously, with LeBron James, there's some Bronny James slash father son connection excitement going on there. And then from Anthony Davis's end, I think he's just been tired of continually being dismissed as a perennial defensive player of the year candidate. And I think, I mean, he was so efficient in the first half of the last game just because what was the first play out of the timeout? Like an alley oop for him, right? And then he pretty much gave us in game 2 of the preseason versus the Suns, he gave us the full Anthony Davis bag. He was throwing down alley oops. He was putting the ball on the floor for spin moves and into two-handed jams. He hit a three-pointer. He hit his mid-range jump shot. And then to his credit and to JJ Redick's credit, he was also running the offense from the top of the key a la Sabonis and hitting people with very nice bounce passes in stride, you know? So I really liked what I've seen from both Anthony Davis and LeBron James in terms of just like they seem revved up and ready to go. But apart from them, or if you want to talk about them, who else stood out to you?
So, LeBron and AD have obviously stood out as they always do, and they've looked great. One guy I have to call out in particular, and maybe this won't surprise people, because this podcast is also known as the Jalen Hood-Schifino podcast.
I told you he was good.
As I've been telling you for the last year, he is good. Okay, so Jalen Hood-Schifino.
Jalen Good-Schifino, apparently.
Jalen Good-Schifino. Look, I'm not going to go, obviously it's going to, until he still has steps to take, many steps to take before we can look back and say, like, it was an objectively good pick. I mean, notably the 3 guys taken immediately after him would probably be, like, today, top 8 rotation players for us. But all that said, he was like, I mean, he looked completely unplayable last year. I don't want to talk about the G League. I'm just talking about like regular NBA season games. He didn't look very good in Summer League. He didn't look very good in preseason. He looked even worse and he got, by the way, a lot of run in preseason because we have been messing around in preseason for the last 2 years, as we've discussed. He didn't look very good in preseason last year, and he looked even worse in like the few NBA games that he actually appeared in. And then like on top of that, he had the injuries, and it just like felt like this guy was wasting away before his career even started. I think today, as of today, I guess, you can see the vision that they maybe had with that pick. I still don't know that Jalen Hood-Schifino is a point guard in the NBA, but he at least has point guard skills, some point guard skills, or at least combo guard skills. And I think the thing that you see a path for him to becoming a productive NBA player. He can hit a mid-range jumper, which he's hit several already in preseason. He's looked a little bit better getting to the rim, I will say, especially coming off of screens. He seems stronger, and I think the biggest area that his strength is standing out is on the defensive side, which is where I think he's really going to have to sort of carve out a niche for himself. He's he's solid size. I think he's like 6'5", decent length. And so that's why I view him really more as like if he could even just develop into like a backup 2 type of player for us, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. with some, kind of off ball like creation skills. So I just, we've talked so much trash about this guy for the last year. I have to just acknowledge that I'm not, we're not biased. We're not trying to be crazy. It is objectively the case that he looks like an NBA player now, when he
Yeah.
did not last year. So I give him some props.
Wait, can I jump in and say something about JHS too?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like I've been pining for him to like fully sort of embrace this role, and we're starting to see it come into effect. Like game one of the preseason, he had the prototypical Bruce Brown line: 6 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists, a steal, and a block. Like that is as
Yeah.
Bruce Brown as it gets. You know what I mean? And to your point about him not being a point guard, unless a play has been called for him to run a pick and roll, I feel like more often than not, he's still a little too tunnel visiony for my liking in terms of just trying to get his own shot in the mid range, which is fine because he's been hitting his smooth mid range pull up, which has been his strongest skill set as a basketball player in his entire career, dating back to high school. But having said that, the thing that has been most impressive to me, and to your point, is I've just appreciated his defensive hustle and defensive competitiveness. Like he's really gone after it. He's really contesting every shot. And I think it's starting to click for him. I think it's starting to click for him that in order for me to get on the court, I just need to be very active and energetic on the defensive end, And so far, offensively, yeah, he has looked very competent. His mid-range jump shot from 18 feet or even like 8 feet has been very sexy and fluid. So yeah, props to JHS because it is no small feat that we are now calling him an NBA player who, if this continues, I don't know, maybe that makes Gabe Vincent expendable and the Lakers can make another trade. But why don't we transition over to Max Christie? Because game one, he looked phenomenal on both ends. Both games, he's looked locked in AF defensively. Max Christie looks spry. He looks stronger. He looks more athletic. And I don't know if I'm reading into this more than I should, but it just feels like this dude is chomping at the bit, Tommy, to just get real playing
Yeah.
time, and he's ready. Like the want and the will is there, and I think yeah, he's ready to take advantage of his opportunity. Now, the last game when he was more on ball and trying to do more like I don't know, Austin Reeves things, I was like, okay, now we know what we don't want Max Christie to do. But in terms of like the defensive intensity and the times where he's like the secondary or tertiary playmaker attacking closeouts, Max Christie has looked very good. So your thoughts on MC?
Yes, I think the big concern that a lot of fans had coming into this season, right, when you're thinking about like a core top 8 a set of guys, is Max Christie going to be good enough as like an 8th guy, if you want to call him that, to compete with like other guys of that caliber on other teams? And I think the answer, at least as of the first couple games, seems to be yes. And I think, by the way, like it's not that I don't think either of us doubted that he would eventually get there. I think it's just, you kind of have to remember, like Max Christie is like 2 years younger than Dalton Knecht, I'm pretty sure,
Yeah.
like he is extremely, extremely young. He was drafted as a project. And I personally think he's actually come along faster than people expected. And so, the nice thing about Max is I think game 2 offensively for him was a lot of sort of what like both games have been for Austin offensively. So far in the preseason, trying to figure out like in this new offensive scheme and in JJ's new system, like where am I going to get my shots? Can I push myself a little bit to try some things out? I view game 2 felt very much like, let me just try this out and see what happens.
Sure.
So I think a lot of that forcing the issue is going to go away. I have a feeling offensively, certainly he will be a lot more deferential and just taking like, spot up shots, working off of cuts, working in transition, things of that nature. And so, the big key for me was what does he look like defensively? I think the strength that he's added is going to do him wonders. He has been one of the guys that's been the most active at pressing, which has been a point of emphasis for JJ. Like, not necessarily picking up full court every time, but once you cross half court, applying extreme amounts of ball pressure so the point guard can't just like stand back and do whatever he wants.
Mm-hmm.
If we can end up in a situation where we can put Max Christie on guys like Bradley Beal and Devin Booker, as we did at times in the Suns game, that would be fantastic. And I think that's like a best case scenario for this season. I think offensively, he can continue to work on all the individual skill stuff that he's been doing. That's very much going to continue to be a work in progress. I think the things that he did last year, but a little bit more developed and refined, I guess. That's probably going to be enough. I think one thing was last year at times he looked overwhelmed. He looked like a deer in headlights, even as a second-year player. But I think a lot of that is going to be gone this year. And he seems to really understand this new coaching staff and what they're expecting out of him, which I think is going to be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also, I believe in the first game, he grabbed like 7 boards as well, which is exactly what we're looking for from a guard / small forward, small forward. What about our rookie, Tommy? Not Bronny James, but Dalton Knecht. So this dude hasn't even shot that well from 3. And yet when you watch him play, can you hear me? Hello? All right, we are going to wait for Tommy to jump back on. Having a little technical difficulties. This is what happens when you podcast on the road, which I do not advise unless you do so safely. Let's see. Hello? Oh, there you go. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. What's the last thing you heard me say?
At once you started talking, you said like one word and then some like noise.
Okay.
It sounded like something beeped, like you hit mute. So that's why I texted you, because I thought maybe you accidentally hit mute. But anyway.
Okay, well, what I said was the other thing about Max Christie is after the first game, he grabbed 7 boards, which is also very impressive and exactly what you want from a guard / small forward. And now I want to talk about our rookie, Tommy, not Bronny James, but DK4. Because this man hasn't even shot from 3 well, but if you actually watch his 2 games, you wouldn't have noticed that.
Yeah.
Just because I don't know, this guy just looks so comfortable on the court. You wouldn't think that he was a rookie. You'd think that like, oh, this guy is just like the natural 6 man off the bench, right? Who gets buckets. And it's like, no, this is his first NBA game, like Dalton Knecht's like off ball cutting, his confident finishing at the rim, because he also bulked up a lot this offseason, his comfortability finding his spots in the mid range. And then you translate that over to him being very competent defensively and really competing on that end, like showing some nice uses of verticality to contest shots at some points. Like he just looks like a veteran player to me. And obviously he's 23 years old, so that's why he fell to the Lakers. But yeah, as I've been saying on X, Dalton Knecht, he's one of the few examples of a draft pick having more value immediately after having been picked than it did before it was picked, So that's because Dalton Knecht has been so good, and you can easily project out what he's going to be for this team. He's strong, he's athletic, he's got great motor on both ends, but overall, he's just so offensively skilled. Tommy, he is a bucket. Your thoughts on DK4?
Yeah, I think a lot of Laker fans have a serious misconception of like who Dalton Knecht is as a player. I feel like, he's like a shooter white guy on a LeBron team. So everybody immediately is like, okay, cool. Kyle Korver is his upside. He's like going to be a role player. And look, maybe in his first year, that's how we end up using him. I will say, I guess to give JJ and his staff another compliment, they clearly have not just defaulted to that line of thinking. And they clearly understand that like Dalton is a very, very gifted offensive player. I mean, I think I would argue that Dalton Knecht, even at 23 years old, like has more upside as an offensive player than Austin Reeves. I haven't seen anything to suggest like he can't be a 20 point per game plus scorer in the league for many, many, many years. Which is not something that is a guarantee at any spot in the draft, let alone post lottery. Um, so, to your point, he has like, what is he, like 2 for 14 or something? And in the first couple games from three, like his 3-point shot has not been falling. That is not uncommon for rookies. Kevin Durant shot like 20% as a first year player,
That's true. Yeah.
as a first year player shooting from three. And, obviously he was an amazing shooter at Texas and, has been an amazing shooter his entire career post that first year. It's always hard for 3-point shooters, even elite 3-point shooters like JJ Redick, I think, struggled his first year, in the league shooting from three. And so like that is going to be an adjustment. But the fact that we've already seen that Dalton can have an impact on games, even without that shot falling, is extremely, extremely encouraging to me. He does so many things offensively that put pressure on the defense. He can put the ball down on the ground. He can hit it from the mid range. He can hit floaters. He can, kind of do some things in the post. You mentioned the cutting. I think the big question that everybody had for him, obviously, and again, I think this is like a lot of it is people just look at him and assume things about him. He's like a 6'6" white guy who shoots, so he can't play defense. And look, I don't know that he was like an elite. I do know he was not an elite defender at Tennessee, but I don't think he was terrible. And I think, he has already shown that when that's a focus for him in the first couple of games, he can do some things on that end. And maybe the strength is helping, but like this guy is a solid 6'6". He's not like, 6'6" if you're, adding a couple inches for shoes, like solid 6'6", decent wingspan, and the strength and basketball IQ, I think is going to make him like, I mean, everybody has said this about him. He's a pro already. And I think that's just because physically and mentally, he's already there. It's sort of like, I mean, it's very, very reminiscent to Jaime Jaquez, where he came in as like an older player and he looks like as a rookie, like, oh, he doesn't look like a normal rookie. Like this guy looks like he's played in the NBA already for at least 1 year. And so I think like if Dalton can continue to show that he can at least hold his own, he's not going to be picked on and not going to be exploited, especially like in team defensive schemes. He is going to really, really make a push to be a part of the core rotation. I know JJ Redick said, he's looking at limiting it to a 9-man rotation, which makes sense because when you have like two superstars and, a top 7 set of guys, maybe even a top 8 set of guys who we've made a fairly significant financial investment in, seems like pretty obvious who that top group is going to be. That, the 8 we're all thinking of plus Jackson Hayes probably. And, but I still think that Dalton is, going to make some noise and push for some minutes, and would not surprise me if JJ just decided, what, we have to figure out a way to play this guy. So we're going to have to find some minutes for him. But yeah, I've been super, super impressed with this poise, and hopefully he gets a couple games under his belt where he hits some shots and gets some confidence there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a good comp to Jaime Jaquez, not in terms of skill set, but in terms of like readiness. And also, you could probably comp him to being like a taller Pajemski too, in terms of a guy that you can just plug and play and he won't get lost out there on either end. So yeah, huge props to Dalton Knecht. I hope it continues. And once his 3-point shot rounds into form, look out. That's when we really connect for. Lastly, because we are the D'Angelo Russell podcast, Tommy, I feel like we are contractually obligated to talk about D'Lo because lo and behold, I don't know. Yes, it's only been 2 preseason games, but D'Angelo Russell still looks like the 3rd best player on this team. You can force him off the ball all you want. You can cede usage from him all you want. He's still going to hit threes. He's still going to feed 80 the ball, find Jackson Hayes for easy lobs, and he'll still do all the complementary off-ball diving stuff that knits things together for this team so well and always force you into reconsidering your silly galaxy brain decisions to diminish his role. Because at the end of the day, D'Angelo Russell is a perfect fit for JJ Redick's system, and you're seeing why. So, any final thoughts on D'Lo still being good, regardless of how much usage he's getting? And in fact, that may even make him better because regardless of what his stats are, the fact that you can toggle his role like this and he's still this effective, playoffs aside, we're going to get to that point. When we get to that point, we are about to enter the regular season. This is a guy that you need.
So I think people really underestimate D'Lo's basketball IQ. I
Yeah,
think because of his personality and just like the way he talks to the media, people like sort of assume they know who this guy is. I mean, look, there are a lot of people who sound really, really smart talking to the media and are complete idiots on the floor. And I feel like you just D'Lo has clearly not made it this far in his NBA career purely on physical ability and innate
not
talent.
at all.
Yeah, if anything, he like for like the numbers he's able to like have consistently put up over the course of his career. Like, where does D'Lo rank in terms of just flat athleticism from like starting point guards in the NBA, which has like increasingly become a more and more athletic position? It's just like it's pretty amazing actually, and I think D'Lo like for all the flack he gets from fans and certain folks in the media, he is really, in my opinion, going to thrive in JJ's system because he gets it. And we've talked about this before, but there are certain types of players who you can't just tell them like this is what we're doing and they'll do it. There are players
Yeah,
who are like that, right? But D'Lo's not one of those guys, and I think there are a lot of people who are not one of those guys. They need to not just be told to do something, but understand. They need to understand the rationale behind a decision, and I think D'Lo is really, having like amazing synergy with with it. First of all, with
yeah,
this roster, but also with this new coaching staff. He really gets it, and I think he gets what they're trying to do and what they're asking of him. And it feels like he's played most of the first two games at half speed and is just like nonchalantly
yeah.
continuing to rain 30-foot threes and like organize the offense. And like once the season starts and the real games, get going, and maybe we'll probably even see it later in this postseason. I think when he really locks in and gets engaged in the system, it's going to be even more impressive to watch. One thing I will call out specifically on with respect to D'Lo is it feels like his off ball defense has gotten a little bit better. Again, I don't know if it's sort of like
Mhm.
what we've talked about with these other guys. Like it seems like because the offense has been more fluid, it's helped guys like be less gassed or less out of position on defense so far. And D'Lo, again, it's like the way that JJ frames it, I think is perfect, right? And it's just crazy when you think about it because it's so logical and it's just weird that like no other coach has framed it this way for him. Like we're not expecting D'Lo to be a one-on-one perimeter lockdown defender, but there are certain things that we think he's capable of doing, and we just want him to focus on those things. And I think like a big key
Yeah,
is like just don't get lost off the ball and give up easy baskets. I mean, he's had like plenty of plays already where it's like you can see teams sort of targeting him and trying to like pick at him or pick on him, like exploit his weaknesses, like, oh, he's going to fall asleep. And he reacts and knocks the ball away, or like, he'll strip a guy who gets past him or block a shot from behind. Like he feels a lot more engaged on that end and
yep,
less what it's been a lot of the last season and a half or so that we've had him, which was you're there to shoot threes and get assists and push the ball and run the offense, and everything else is just tangential, like, or sorry, everything else is just like a nice to have. Like, your focus is once the ball goes through the net, grab it and go as fast as or off the rim, grab it and go as fast as you can. But otherwise, you are who you are defensively. And I think JJ is challenging him to focus on the things that he can do defensively. And I think it's going to have an impact. You and I have talked about this a little bit offline. This is the last thing I'll say. You and I have talked about this a little bit offline. Everybody is so focused on the starting backcourt and whether these two guys can play together. And I just think it like, if we need to decide between one of Austin and D'Lo who's going to start, to me it just makes so much more sense to start D'Lo like with a Max Christie or something like that if we need more
hmm
defense in the backcourt. Um, he is such a dynamic player and he brings so much to this team, and it's just like you look at the like pure just offensive talent on this team outside of LeBron and AD, and if you remove D'Lo from that equation, it is a steep drop off. But when you have D'Lo
yeah,
there, it's like he looks like an all-star because he has been an all-star. And I just like, again, I I know everybody wants this guy traded and he's an expiring contract and this and that, but he is really, really going to be valuable for us this season, in my opinion.
Yeah, he is like an offensive safety blanket for this team. Like whatever the team needs him to do, he can do. And so far he has done. And it's almost like, to your point about his defensive effort, like he's fighting through screens now. I see him actually tracking players. Whether or not he can get all the way to the rim
Right.
is another question, but he's trying. And then it's just funny that D'Angelo Russell, in some ways, we kind of fell ass backwards into this for one reason or another. But if you remember 2 years ago, the Lakers had this silly plan, and it may have been just talk, but they had this plan for Darvin Ham to sort of rehabilitate Russell Westbrook, right?
Right.
And D'Angelo Russell never needed rehabilitation because his skill set perfectly aligns with the modern day NBA. But it's just so funny that in every way, D'Angelo Russell is almost this fully realized version of what the Lakers were trying to do with Russell Westbrook, and yet he's also the first person that people want to ship out. And yet we see it actually working in real time in terms of, hey, we have a new coach, let's see what he can do with D'Angelo Russell and whether or not they can form this synergy together. And we are tangibly seeing it happen. Whether or not it extends to post trade deadline, who knows? But at least you're seeing the framework of what can happen with a player who has these sorts of skill sets, and also a player with this type of high basketball IQ. So thank God that we didn't trade D'Angelo Russell for Dorian
Yeah,
Finney-Smith and give
Jesus
away our
Christ.
2029 first. So this has been fun. It so far has been working, and I can't wait to watch more because, yeah, the Lakers for some reason are flying out to Milwaukee for one preseason game, but hopefully nobody gets injured. But yeah, so far so good with JJ Redick. So with that said, we will catch you guys next time. Follow us on Twitter at Lakers Legacy Pod. Please also give us a five-star rating and review on the Apple Podcast app and Spotify, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Lakers Legacy Pod. With that said, Tommy, I will catch you later.
Peace.
See ya.